At sunrise, the HOA president ordered concrete poured around my cabin gate posts, sealing me out and threatening $500 a day fines if I touched it. She smiled like she'd won. She didn't understand the road they needed to survive was mine. If you watch for real justice, real consequences, and bullies losing control the second paperwork meets reality, subscribe. These HOA power trips always end the same way, with receipts. The morning they sealed my gate felt like an eviction from my own memory. The cabin wasn't a vacation property to me. It was a place stitched into my life long before the HOA ever existed. The road leading to it was a ribbon of gravel I could recognize by sound alone, tires crunching in the same rhythm I'd heard as a kid, the last stretch always dropping into the trees like a secret. My name is Marcus Brennan. I'm a retired Army Corps engineer who learned early that structures fail when people ignore the load they're putting on them. After my wife Sarah died, the cabin became the only place where my head stopped racing. Weekends there weren't luxury, they were survival. I rebuilt little things with my hands, broken hinges, warped boards, loose steps, because grief doesn't argue with a level, a wrench, or a plan. My grandfather left me 40 acres of Montana wilderness and that cabin at the edge of it. One detail mattered more than the cabin itself, a private gravel road connecting my land to Highway 12. It wasn't public, it wasn't county maintained, and it wasn't an HOA amenity. It existed because my family built it, graded it, and paid for it, year after year, when nobody else had reason to care. In 2019, Pine View Estates wrapped around my property like new growth. 47 mountain luxury homes appeared in clean lines and bright windows, marketed with talk of convenience and easy access. The sales brochures featured the same gravel road my family built, framed like it belonged to the development. For a while, nobody confronted the mistake because it was easier to assume the road was shared than to read the original deeds and ask ugly questions. I had no interest in being anyone's villain. I tolerated the traffic because the cabin sat far enough back that most days, I didn't even see the vehicles. What I did notice were the small changes: fresh tire ruts after rain, loose gravel pushed into the ditch, trash in the pull-off where people stopped to take pictures, the occasional speeding car treating my property like a shortcut. Then Delilah Peton moved in. She bought the biggest house and behaved like she'd bought the mountain itself. She learned the HOA's rules and treated them like a crown. She became HOA president fast, not because she was competent, but because she was relentless. She spoke in the language of standards and values, and she used those words to cover the only thing she truly wanted: control. Her first visit to my cabin wasn't neighborly. It was a performance. She assessed my gate like it offended her personally. The gate had been there since the late 80s, a simple iron barrier that marked the boundary and kept casual trespassers from wandering up to the cabin when no one was around. Delilah called it rustic, in the way people say dirty, while pretending to be polite. She demanded upgrades, approvals, compliance. I explained the basics. I wasn't part of their HOA. My land wasn't within their plats. My gate wasn't on their property. The rulebook she waved didn't reach my boundary line. Her smile didn't drop, but it changed. It became thinner, like a blade turned sideways. Within weeks, the harassment shifted from personal to bureaucratic. County complaints appeared out of nowhere. Inspectors arrived, looked around, found nothing, and left with the same quiet message: someone wanted me bothered. Rumors followed. The HOA's meeting notes painted me as a problem. A hermit. Unstable. A risk. The kind of story that makes people stop asking questions and start nodding along. I recognized the tactic. In the military, you learn that if someone can't beat you on the facts, they try to poison the room so nobody listens to you. I tried to resolve it cleanly. I offered what I didn't have to offer: a formal easement for essentially nothing, $1 a year, just to put their road use on paper and end the nonsense. All I wanted was a mutual respect clause. No changes to my property, no barriers, no intimidation, no unilateral decisions. Delilah treated the offer like an insult. She framed it as extortion. She acted like 4 years of using my road turned trespass into entitlement. She left the meeting full of confidence, like she'd just secured a moral victory without realizing she'd refused the cheapest solution she'd ever get. After that, cameras appeared. New surveillance aimed toward my gate. A slow drip of intimidation. A strategy designed to make me feel watched on my own land. I responded the way engineers respond. I started documenting. Trail cameras went up along the road. Not hidden, not sneaky, obvious, legal, and aimed at the road that crossed my land. Timestamps. Plates. Frequency. Nothing emotional, just data. That's when I discovered something bigger than Delilah's ego. Her real estate listings, past and present, treated my private road like a selling feature. The language wasn't vague, it was confident. Guaranteed highway access. Established community route. Photos of the gravel road with captions that made it look like Pine View's infrastructure. She hadn't just assumed the road was theirs. She'd been monetizing that assumption. I opened my grandfather's old document case that night, the one I'd avoided because it smelled like history and loss. Inside were deeds, surveys, agreements, and decades of proof. I found what I expected, our ownership of the road, clean and clear. I also found something I didn't expect, something that would turn Delilah's coming mistake into a catastrophe for her. A developer agreement from the original road era. A clause about emergency access and obstruction. A clause written in calm legal language that hid a brutal consequence. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because Delilah hadn't played her final card. She was the kind of person who only escalated. And the day she decided to solve my gate problem with concrete would be the day she trapped her entire community inside a legal box they couldn't climb out of. The rumble woke me before the sun did. Diesel engines don't belong in quiet timber mornings, and my body recognized the sound the way it once recognized convoy movement. I stepped onto my porch and saw cement trucks crawling down the gravel like the road belonged to them. Workers moved with purpose, not curiosity. That told me it was planned. It wasn't a random homeowner doing something stupid, it was an operation. Delilah stood at the edge of it with the posture of someone watching a job done for her. She didn't look nervous. She looked pleased. They poured concrete around my gate posts first. Not a little patch. A full collar that locked the posts in place and turned my functional gate into a useless ornament. They built a barrier that narrowed the opening so sharply that even if the gate swung, nothing wider than a bicycle would pass. Then they planted security signage like it was their land. By the time I reached the work area, the concrete was already setting. Delilah treated it like a victory photo. She watched me the way people watch someone they expect to break. Her plan was obvious: provoke me into tearing it out, then hit me with fines and enforcement until I either paid or surrendered. She threatened daily penalties. She framed it as community safety. She acted like her HOA vote was permission to build anything anywhere. I didn't argue at the site. Arguments feed people like Delilah. Instead, I recorded quietly: trucks, plates, workers, the exact time, the lack of permit postings, the placement of every barrier. Then I made phone calls. First, to the county building office, unpermitted work obstructing access. Second, to the fire marshal, a barrier affecting emergency entry to a development. Third, to my attorney friend in Helena, Jake Morrison, who specialized in property rights. Fourth, to my insurance adjuster, property damage in progress. I also did something small that felt like a reversal of Delilah's cruelty. I offered the workers coffee money and thanked them for their time. They looked confused because villains don't do that. Delilah looked annoyed because control freaks hate when their enemy behaves like a normal human. Within an hour, the consequences started, but not the ones Delilah expected. The first commuter tried to leave the development and discovered the road choke point. A sedan scraped its bumper because the clearance was too tight. A delivery truck backed up 100 yards and jammed the turn. A school bus stopped, hissed air brakes, and sat there like reality had finally arrived. By mid-morning, Pine View Estates looked like a luxury neighborhood trapped behind its own mistake. Cars lined up. People stood in winter jackets staring at the concrete with the confused anger of people who hadn't known their daily life depended on a road they never owned. Delilah tried to play it off as temporary. She tried to order people around like a traffic officer. It only made the crowd sharper. HOA power works when people believe there's an authority behind it. It collapses when everyone sees it's just a person with a clipboard and no plan. When county staff arrived, they didn't treat it like HOA business. They treated it like what it was: unauthorized obstruction affecting safety and access. The fire marshal's reaction was immediate and hostile, because emergency access isn't a neighborhood preference. It's non-negotiable. Delilah spun. She blamed me. She claimed I forced her hand. She implied I was dangerous, obstructive, unreasonable. That was when I stepped back toward my cabin, opened the old document case again, and found the clause that made the whole morning feel like slow-motion irony. The original developer agreement wasn't about the HOA at all. It was about the access corridor. It recognized the road crossed private land. It outlined conditions for emergency passage. And it included a penalty. If access was obstructed beyond a set window, the party responsible owed a steep daily amount to the landowner until the access was restored. The number wasn't symbolic. It was devastating. Jake called back after reviewing the scans I sent. His reaction wasn't casual. It was the kind of tone professionals use when they're trying not to laugh because laughter would sound cruel. The clause applied. It was transferable. And the HOA's barrier counted as obstruction. The clock had started the moment the concrete hit the posts. I checked Pineview's HOA financials through public records. Their reserves were modest. Their operating budget was smaller than Delilah acted like it was. The penalty would outpace their funds fast. Past that point, the bylaws and liability rules made it worse. Board members could be personally exposed if they authorized actions that financially harmed the association. Delilah had convinced 3 board members to follow her into this move. She didn't just gamble with her pride. She gambled with other people's homes. I returned to the crowd with the agreement in a folder. This time, Delilah's smile didn't feel sharp. It looked fragile. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply explained the clause and the daily penalty. I explained the clock. I explained the math. At first, nobody believed it. Then Jake's email confirmation arrived, and the county staff asked to see the document. Their faces changed the moment they saw the language. People who had ignored me for months suddenly listened because money has a way of making reality loud. The development didn't feel like Delilah's kingdom anymore. It felt like 47 families realizing their HOA president had turned their only exit into a financial minefield. Delilah tried to regain control by promising she'd handle it. But the barriers were still there. The clock was still running. And now the problem wasn't me being locked out. It was them being locked in, with a penalty meter rising and a legal paper trail that would not care about her tone, her status, or her ability to smirk. Delilah's next week was a case study in how power addicts react when they finally meet consequences. She didn't apologize. She didn't retreat. She doubled down as if louder confidence could cancel legal language. She launched a petition to protect community access. She framed the concrete barrier like a necessary defense against an unreasonable landowner. She pushed residents to sign without reading, using fear words like emergency, children, and safety to force agreement. But fear stopped working once the penalty clock became visible. I built a simple solar-powered LED sign and mounted it on my side of the road in plain view. Nothing threatening. Just numbers and dates, days obstructed, penalties owed, updated daily. It turned confusion into clarity. Every resident saw the meter rising every time they drove up, every time they walked around the barrier, every time they checked whether their life was back to normal. At the same time, I tightened my documentation. Trail cameras captured every vehicle crossing my land. I compiled plates, dates, and frequency. Not to punish random families, but to prove a single point. Delilah had been selling access she didn't own, and the HOA had been using my property as infrastructure without legal rights. I also documented something more important: delayed services. The mail truck reroutes. The school bus stops. The emergency response confusion. Because the more Delilah insisted the barrier was safety, the more it created actual risk. The revolt inside Pineview Estates didn't start with shouting. It started with quiet visits. One family knocked on my cabin door with a nervous apology in their posture and asked if the problem could be fixed without losing their house. Another asked if the road was truly private. Another asked if Delilah had lied to them at closing. An older woman, Eleanor Martinez, became the turning point. She wasn't loud, but she was exact. A retired paralegal with the kind of calm that made other people stop pretending. She had read the HOA bylaws and understood liability. She understood what personal exposure meant. She understood that Delilah's leadership was about to drag innocent people into financial ruin. Eleanor organized a coalition of families who wanted Delilah removed immediately. The coalition didn't care about pride. They cared about survival. They demanded board transparency, immediate legal counsel independent of Delilah, and removal of the barriers. Delilah answered with the move authoritarian people always use when facts corner them: character attacks. She hired an investigator to dig up dirt on me. She spread new rumors about my military history. She tried to paint my engineering background as dangerous. She implied I was setting traps. She tried to make people afraid to side with me. The investigator found nothing. Boring truth is the enemy of smear campaigns. Then Delilah escalated again, past PR and into criminal territory. A county inspector contacted me and reported an attempted bribe. A cash offer to find violations on my property that could justify county interference. The conversation was recorded on official equipment. That evidence didn't just weaken Delilah. It cracked her career at the foundation. Eleanor's coalition grew overnight when that information leaked through the development like wildfire. People who had tolerated Delilah's attitude suddenly saw her as a liability that could put them on the wrong side of a criminal case. Delilah's support collapsed in real time. Board members who had voted with her started making calls to attorneys. People who had cheered her standards began avoiding her driveway. The HOA's own legal firm started retreating, because attorneys love confident clients until the clients start confessing to bribery. Local media picked up the story when the county confirmed safety obstruction reports. A producer reached out after hearing there was recorded evidence of misconduct. The visuals did the rest: a concrete choke point, a trapped luxury development, and a private landowner holding the receipts. Delilah tried to control the narrative on camera and made it worse. Instead of denying, she rationalized. Instead of explaining, she ranted. The moment she framed rule-breaking as necessary, she gave prosecutors the one thing they crave: intent. Meanwhile, the penalty meter hit a number Pine View estates couldn't ignore. The HOA had no realistic way to pay without emergency assessments. Families started calculating what they'd owe because of Delilah's ego. The math was brutal. The resentment turned sharp. The board scheduled a public meeting at the elementary school gym. Not a normal HOA meeting. A crisis meeting. Residents demanded answers, financial transparency, and a path out. Delilah arrived dressed like she could still command the room. But her hands betrayed her. Her posture was tight. Her eyes kept scanning faces like she was searching for allies who no longer existed. The coalition sat together. County officials arrived. The fire marshal brought reports. The inspector's office brought documentation. The deputy arrived with legal paperwork ready if needed. I sat with Eleanor near the front and kept my folder closed until the right moment. My goal wasn't humiliation. It was resolution with consequences, so it couldn't happen again. Delilah was about to learn that controlling a neighborhood is easy when people are confused. It becomes impossible when everyone sees the documents and understands the math. The gym smelled like floor wax and stale coffee, the scent of small-town meetings where people pretend they're calm while their lives are on the line. Folding chairs filled fast. Residents arrived in winter jackets, faces tight with stress. Parents held kids close, not because the kids understood, but because anxiety spreads through a room like cold air. The county opened first. The fire marshal summarized delayed access incidents and the ongoing safety violation created by the barriers. No drama, no insults, just the kind of language that tells a room this isn't a debate. Then the financial reality hit. The HOA treasurer stood, voice strained, and confirmed the reserves couldn't cover the penalties. Emergency assessments were the only option unless the situation ended immediately and negotiations happened fast. Delilah tried to speak like a leader. She framed the barrier as a defensive response to hostility. She tried to pull the room back into emotion where she felt strongest. It didn't work. Eleanor's coalition asked direct questions: permits, authority, liability, and who approved what. Delilah pivoted, blaming contractors, blaming misunderstanding, blaming me, blaming anyone except the truth. That was when I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't insult her. I laid out the history, my family's ownership of the road, the lack of easement, and the fact that I had offered a clean solution months earlier. Then I opened the folder and presented the developer agreement clause. The room changed as people finally understood there was no clever argument to escape a contract that had been signed long before Delilah ever saw Pineview's marketing brochures. I explained the daily penalty, the transferability, and the compounding reality. I explained that I had kept documentation and had been prepared to enforce it, but that my goal had never been to strand families. My goal was to stop the HOA from treating my property like a toy. Then I offered the same solution again, not as a favor, but as a final off-ramp, a formal easement at a nominal fee, with strict terms and a requirement that the HOA recognize boundaries and stop interference. A clean legal path forward. The room's frustration turned toward Delilah, because everyone understood what she had cost them. That was the moment the deputy stood. The deputy didn't present it as spectacle. He presented it as procedure. The bribery attempt was documented. The county had recordings. The investigation had enough to move forward. Delilah's face collapsed into a look that wasn't rage anymore. It was the realization that her usual tactics, smearing, threatening, posturing, didn't apply to law enforcement. Handcuffs in a gym don't feel cinematic. They feel quiet and final. People watched without cheering because most of them weren't cruel. They were just relieved to see the danger removed from their lives. The barriers came down quickly after that. Not because the HOA found humility, but because the county enforced safety rules and the board finally acted like it was accountable to reality. The financial consequences still landed. The penalties didn't disappear just because the concrete was removed. The HOA negotiated payment terms through council, and residents learned the expensive truth. Even when one person causes the disaster, a community can still pay the bill if it tolerated the behavior long enough. Some families struggled. Payment plans were arranged. A few sold their homes. The development carried the stain of Delilah's mistake for a while, like a bruise that doesn't fade quickly. But something else happened too. Pineview changed. Eleanor was elected as interim president by an overwhelming vote. She implemented transparency rules. Every board action required written legal review. Meetings became public, properly noticed, and documented. No more emergency decisions made by a small circle with big egos. No more treating private property like community scenery. The HOA also corrected its marketing claims. Realtors were required to disclose the road status and the easement agreement terms. The guaranteed access lie died fast once it had legal consequences attached to it. As for me, my cabin weekends went back to what they were meant to be: quiet repair work, cedar scent in the workshop, creek water in the background, and the kind of silence grief needs. The gate stayed. I didn't replace it with something upscale. I left it exactly as my grandfather built it, because the gate wasn't the problem. The problem was people who thought ownership was negotiable. The road became a symbol in its own way. It still connected families to Highway 12, but now it did so legally, with respect, and with the understanding that cooperation isn't something you take, it's something you earn. I used part of the settlement money to fund a small program at the local community college for land use education. Not because I wanted to become anyone's hero, but because I learned something in this fight that I wished every homeowner knew. When you don't understand your rights, someone else will use that ignorance against you. Delilah didn't lose because I was louder. She lost because contracts don't care about confidence. Months later, the development held a community barbecue, voluntary, no fines, no posturing. Families showed up not because they were forced, but because they finally felt safe enough to act like neighbors. Kids ran around without parents scanning for authority figures. Adults talked like people again. My gate was open that day. Not because anyone took control of it, but because I chose to share peace once boundaries were respected. And the day they poured concrete around my posts, thinking they'd sealed my fate, became the day everyone learned a lesson that lasts longer than any HOA presidency. You can build walls fast, but you can't build ownership with concrete. The end.